Okay, so moving on a little bit to a different sort of topic within this section are microbes in energy and nutrient flow. So microbes are very much involved in the flow of energy and food through the Earth's ecosystem. Microbes can drive photosynthesis, and of course when you hear photosynthesis, you've all had a science class of some kind before. Hopefully you're thinking plants, plants, plants. And plants do photosynthesize. They are the primary autotrophs or primary producers on Earth, and they use photosynthesis to take sunlight and convert it into sugar. But microorganisms can do that too. So there's blue-green algae, there's cyanobacteria, and they can undergo photosynthesis as well. And so photosynthesis is the light-fueled conversion of carbon dioxide to organic materials such as glucose, which is a simple sugar. So we're harvesting sunlight using carbon dioxide and turning that combination of energy from sunlight and carbon dioxide into organic sugars. And that organic sugar then becomes the basis for all of the food that other organisms, animals, and humans eat. So we actually in that first picture see a pond that has scum all across the top. That scum is actually diatoms and blue-green bacteria. So the blue-green bacteria is very busy photosynthesizing. And then we talk, the other major process that we talk about that microbes are involved in as far as energy flow is decomposition. So they can build stuff in photosynthesis and then they break it down in decomposition. It's definitely a cycle. So microbes are the ultimate recyclers. They break down dead matter and waste into simple compounds. So we see in the second picture a tomato that's being consumed by a mold called Rhizopus. And so the subset picture are the stalks of reproductive spores on Rhizopus. So you can see why it's kind of fuzzy looking on the surface. So the tomato is being decomposed by this Rhizopus fungi. The fungi is breaking down the body of the tomato and returning those nutrients into, ideally, the soil so that those nutrients can be recycled and built back into something else. And then the last picture is sort of a weird picture to kind of throw in here, but it's showing you a dry lake in Antarctica, one of the coldest places on Earth. And microbes are actually living underneath that ice sheet. And so what they're showing you here is, in the subset picture, that's like the hot pink stuff, that's red cyanobacteria. It's been frozen in that lake for years. And so they think maybe this is the kind of habitat on Earth that's a model for conditions on Mars. Alright, so throughout these lectures provided by the textbook, we have these things called concept checks. And just kind of check to see if you're following along, kind of where you are in your understanding. And so we're going to take just a second to answer this question. Which of the following does not describe a fungus? It's a pretty tough question because we haven't talked too much about what fungi are, but they are eukaryotes. So A contains a nucleus. B has 86 S ribosomes. We haven't talked about what that is yet. C is useful in decomposition. And D is photosynthetic. Okay, so think about it. Okay, so automatically, definitely, fungi have a nucleus because they're eukaryotic cells. And we just talked about how they play a role in decomposition. So A and C are out. We don't know much about the ADS ribosomes, so I'm going to give you a clue there. They do have ADS ribosomes, and we'll learn more about that later. So, which one does not describe a fungus? Fungi are not photosynthetic. And actually, for years, scientists grouped fungi and plants into the same kingdom because they thought they were the same because they both have cell walls. But then we learned that fungi are not photosynthetic. They eat other organisms and break down other organisms to get their nutrients. So they are heterotrophic feeders. They have to get their nutrients from something else. So they're not photosynthetic, and we put them into a different kingdom, and now there's a whole kingdom just for fungi called Kingdom Fungi. Okay, moving on to chapter 1.3, or section 1.3 of chapter 1, we start talking about how humans use microorganisms. There's really three main things I want you to remember here. We use microorganisms in biotechnology, in genetic engineering, and in bioremediation. So biotechnology involves production of food, drugs, and vaccines. Genetic engineering is where we manipulate the genes of an organism to make new products. So we take genes from one organism and insert it into the DNA of another organism, and we allow that gene to be expressed, creating a cell that functions differently or looks differently than the original cell. And then bioremediation we haven't talked about too much yet. So bioremediation is a process that introduces microbes into the environment to restore the stability of the environment or to clean up toxic pollutants after a spill or a contamination has occurred. So microbes are really great at breaking down chemicals. And so agencies and companies have developed microorganisms that can break down the oil in the oil spills. They can break down chemicals that are toxic, so they can be used to detoxify sites that have been contaminated with heavy metals, with pesticides, or even radioactive waste. So the pictures here are showing you some microorganisms at work. So in the top picture we see algae specialists inside of some biodiesel reactors. So these are platforms of bags that contain cultures of single-celled algae. And we can see what that algae looks like in the smaller picture there. And these algae mass-produce oil that can be used as an alternative to fossil fuels. So this is an alternate way of growing renewable fuels that looks very promising, and it may truly provide a source of green energy. In photo B, we see workers remove waste from a nuclear facility in Washington State that has been contaminated with radioactive substances. So it's a cleanup site of radioactive substances. It's going to take several years to do this, but scientists have discovered a bacterium, Schwannelli, I think is how you say it, that's being tested as a bioremediation measure. So this bacteria is able to reduce and detoxify dangerous elements such as uranium, which is found in radioactive waste. Okay, so moving on to section 1.4, microbial roles in infectious diseases. So this is really where we get into the heart of this course. We spend the majority of this class talking about infectious diseases and microbes' role and how humans interact to the microbes when they invade our bodies. It is important to remember, though, that most microbes are harmless, and a lot of them are even beneficial to us and essential to our survival. So we end up talking about all the negative parts of microorganisms, but there's actually a lot of good things about microorganisms as well. And some microorganisms have very close associations with other organisms, and those associations can be positive and they can be negative. When it's a negative association, we call that microorganism a parasite. It lives on or in the body of another organism called its host, and it does damage to the host. So in order to be a parasite, it has to, by definition, damage the host. Another term that can be used to specify this type of microorganism is a pathogen. So if it causes disease, if it's a parasite that causes disease, then we call it a pathogen. Okay, so the World Health Organization estimates that there are around 10 billion new infections of all types across the world every year. There are more infections than people, so that's kind of amazing because many people get more than one infection each year. And infectious diseases are the most common cause of death in much of humanity. They still kill a lot of the United States population. You can see a table on page 10 in your textbook that shows deaths in the United States by the top causes and deaths worldwide by the top causes. The worldwide death toll from infectious diseases is about 12 million people per year. So you can see that the top infectious diseases of death worldwide, 5 of those are caused by infections that are actually treatable with drugs or preventable with vaccines. So the countries where this occurs the most are countries where the residents don't have adequate medical care. So 1/3 of the Earth's inhabitants are malnourished and are not fully immunized. So we see this pie chart that shows worldwide infectious disease statistics. We can see that the top infectious disease killer are the group of respiratory infections that include pneumonia and influenza, or the flu. AIDS is 18%, it's second worldwide. Diarrheal diseases such as cholera, dysentery, and typhoid are 17.5. Then we have tuberculosis, malaria, measles, hepatitis B, tetanus, parasitic diseases, and a group of miscellaneous diseases. So most of these we're not so familiar with in the United States. You know, we deal with respiratory infections, we deal with HIV and AIDS, but other than that, the rest of them we've pretty much controlled through vaccinations. So it's pretty, there's a huge difference, I guess is what I'm trying to say, in what we deal with in the United States and worldwide what we're dealing with as far as infections. Another really interesting discovery that's happened in recent years is that a lot of diseases that people once considered to be caused by something that wasn't infectious is actually probably due to microbial infection. So a good example of this is ulcers. People used to think that ulcers were caused by stress, but now we know that ulcers are caused by bacterium Helicobacter. There's a lot of evidence now that there's a connection between diabetes and Coxsackie virus, between chronic fatigue syndrome and a new retrovirus. Diseases such as multiple sclerosis, obsessive compulsive disorder, and coronary artery disease have been linked to chronic infections with microorganisms. So we're discovering new roles of microorganisms in these destructive diseases, and most scientists think that in time many chronic conditions will be found to have some association with microbial agents. And here's the table that I was referring to earlier that compares the causes of death in the United States to the causes of death worldwide. So the ones in pink are caused by, are most clearly caused by microorganisms. I'm going to give you just a second to look through that. Again, it's in your textbook on page 10.